The air in the cabin tasted like yesterday, a recycled, metallic flatness that coated my tongue. I had a window seat. For hours, I watched the country unfold beneath me, a patchwork quilt of green and brown, stitched together with glittering rivers. It was a quilt my wife, Martha, would have liked. She was a quilter. Her hands, even when gnarled by arthritis, moved with a certainty I always envied. They knew the path. Mine only knew the feel of a wrench or the grain of a piece of oak. The flight was smooth. A good omen, I thought. I was flying to see Leo graduate. My grandson, the only one who still called just to talk. The others called when they needed something. A forgotten recipe of his grandmother's. The name of the plumber I used in 2003. The dimensions of the attic. I had a gift for him in my check bag, wrapped in plain brown paper and twine. A set of drafting pencils, German-made, weighted and cool to the touch, and a leather-bound journal. For his ideas. He was going to start a company, something with computers and code, a language I didn't speak but respected for its power. I had also promised him the seed money, a significant amount. It was the money from the sale of Martha's jewelry and some old stock I'd been sitting on for 40 years. It felt right. A grandmother's legacy funding a grandson's future. My son, David, was supposed to pick me up. His last text, sent yesterday, said so. We'll be there at baggage claim. Can't wait. K for Karen, his wife. The ampersand felt like an afterthought. I stood by the carousel, watching the same black suitcase circle for the third time. The river of people thinned to a trickle. My own bag, a sturdy old canvas thing, sat at my feet. An hour passed. The air in the terminal was different from the plane, sweeter, with the smell of Cinnabon and floor polish. I found a hard plastic chair and sat down. The announcements echoed, blurring into a single, meaningless hum. I checked my phone. It was an old flip phone. Martha had bought it for me. For emergencies, Frank, she'd said. I didn't like the new ones. Too many windows, not enough wall. No missed calls. No new texts. I called David. It went a voicemail. Hi, you've reached David. Leave a message. The voice was cheerful. Distant. I didn't leave a message. I snapped the phone shut. The click was small, but it felt final. Another 30 minutes bled away. The janitor pushed a wide, dusty mop in slow arcs near my feet. He didn't look at me. I was just another piece of furniture to navigate. I thought about my options. I could call again. I could wait. I could sit here until the sun went down and the terminal lights cast long, lonely shadows. I had gotten good at waiting. It's what you do when you are old. You wait for appointments, for phone calls, for the kettle to whistle. You wait for people to remember you. But something felt different this time. A loose thread on the quilt. I stood up, my knees cracking a quiet protest. I walked out of the terminal, into the humid embrace of the afternoon. The line for taxis was long, but it was moving. It was a line with a purpose. I got in. Where to? The driver asked. He had a beaded seat cover that pressed a strange pattern into my back. I gave him David's address, a place I had helped paint, a place where I had installed a new water heater just last fall. I knew its bones. The ride was quiet. I watched the city slide by. It was bigger, shinier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just smaller. When we pulled onto their street, I could hear the party. A low thrum of music and laughter spilling out over manicured lawns. Cars lined both sides of the road. Big, expensive cars. I paid the driver and got out. My canvas bag felt heavy. The walk up the driveway was the longest I'd ever taken. I could see them in the backyard. A crowd of strangers in bright summer clothes, holding glasses of wine. David was at the grill. He wore a ridiculous apron that said, "License a grill." He was laughing, flipping burgers. Karen was flitting between groups, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. I saw Leo, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt, talking to a man in a pale blue suit. No one saw me. I stood by the side of the house, shielded by a large azalea bush Martha had helped plant years ago. The smell of barbecue smoke was thick, cloying. It was my smell. I was the one who always manned the grill. They told me last summer my methods were too old-fashioned. That charcoal was passé. I was about to step out, to clear my throat and announce my arrival, to become visible. Then I heard Karen's voice. It was sharp, cutting through the music. She was talking to a woman with an elaborate gold necklace. "I just don't know what we were thinking," Karen said, and she laughed. A sound like ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. Inviting him. "He's just so slow now." The woman with the necklace murmured something. "Oh, the ticket," Karen continued. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, but the wind carried it right to me. "Thank God you mentioned Arthur want to come." Giving him Frank's ticket was a stroke of genius. Arthur is a potential investor for Leo's thing. It's called networking. "What if he shows up?" the woman asked. "He won't." David's voice joining them. I couldn't see him, but I knew his voice. I knew its cadence. I forgot to call him back. He'll just assume there was a mix-up. He can watch the live stream. It's better for him anyway. Less confusing. Then came a sound that broke me. It wasn't the words. It was the laughter that followed. Not mean, not malicious. Just thoughtless. The easy, dismissive laughter of people swatting away a fly. The sound of my own invisibility. My hands did not tremble. My breath did not catch. A strange and sudden calm washed over me, cold and clear as deep water. It was the eye of a storm I hadn't even realized was brewing. In that moment, standing by the blooming azalea, I was not a father. I was not a grandfather. I was a line item, a provision, a contingency that had been canceled. I turned around. I did not look back. I walked down the long driveway, each step measured and even. My old canvas bag suddenly felt light. I reached the street and pulled out my phone. I didn't call for a taxi. I used an app the kid at the phone store had insisted on installing. I had never used it before. It felt appropriate to start now. A car arrived in 3 minutes. A clean, silent electric car. The driver was young, didn't speak. He just followed the map on his screen. "Where to?" he had asked. A perfunctory question. I didn't have an answer. Home was 1,000 miles away. The house I had just left was not a home. "A hotel," I said. "Near the airport. Anyone will do." He nodded. The car pulled away from the curb, and the sound of the party faded until it was gone. The hotel room was a study in beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, a beige armchair that looked like it had absorbed the size of 1,000 lonely travelers. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and faint despair. The window looked out over a parking lot and the distant, ceaseless motion of the freeway. Cars moving with purpose, from here to there. I placed my canvas bag on the luggage rack. I didn't unpack. The brown paper parcel with Leo's gift seemed like an artifact from another man's life. I went into the small bathroom. The face in the mirror was a stranger. Haggard, gray. The lines around my eyes weren't from laughter. They were from strain, from holding things in, from a lifetime of accommodating, of making myself smaller to fit into the spaces they left for me. I turned on the tap and splashed cold water on my face. The shock of it was grounding. I looked back at the mirror. The man was still there, but his eyes were different. The pleading was gone. The quiet hope was gone. In its place was something hard, something solid. It was not anger. I had felt anger before. Anger is a hot, messy thing. It blinds you. This was not that. This was clarity. This was the cold, perfect logic of a blueprint. Everything in its right place. Every line with a purpose. They had made a business decision. They had weighed my presence against the potential of a new investor and found me wanting. They had calculated the risk of my displeasure and deemed it negligible. It was, I had to admit, a clean calculation. Unsentimental. Efficient. I would respond in kind. I went back into the room and sat in the beige armchair. The springs groaned. I picked up the phone on the bedside table and dialed for room service. "I'd like a pot of black coffee, please," I said. The coffee arrived on a tray, accompanied by a single, plastic-wrapped biscotti. It was weak, bitter. I drank it anyway. Each sip was a punctuation mark. and into a sentence that had run on for too long. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner and the faint whoosh of traffic. It was a clean silence, a silence not filled with unspoken resentments or the expectation of a phone call. It was my silence. I owned it. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and took out a small, spiral-bound notebook and a pen. It was my list book, for groceries, for hardware store runs, for remembering birthdays. I flipped to a fresh page. The clean, white paper was a blank slate. A new beginning. At the top, I wrote a heading. Things to do. The penmanship was steady, not the shaky scrawl of an old man. The firm, confident script of an architect, a man drawing a new design for his life. Underneath, I wrote the first item. 1. Call Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies was my lawyer. A young man, but sharp. He handled Martha's will with a gentleness that belied his profession. I added a second item. 2. Bank. Simple. Direct. I looked at the 2 items on the page. They were the load-bearing walls of a new structure. Everything else would be built around them. I remembered teaching David how to ride a bike on the street outside our old house. His small hands gripping the handlebars, his face a mask of terror and exhilaration. I had run behind him, my hand on the back of the seat, until I let go and he wobbled, then soared on his own. "I'm doing it, Dad. I'm doing it," he had shouted, his voice full of wonder. What did I let go? Or was it that he had simply ridden so far ahead he forgot I was ever running behind him? The memory didn't hurt. It was just a fact, a piece of data, like an old stock price. It had value once. Now, it was just a number on a dusty page. I thought of Leo. This part was harder. The boy was a good kid. He had his grandmother's eyes. Kind. He was caught in the middle of this, a pawn in their game of networking and ambition. The pencils and the journal in my bag were for him. For the boy I thought he was, the man I hoped he would become. But the seed money, that was different. The money was tied to them, to David and Karen. It was meant to launch a company they would surely co-opt, a success they would claim as their own. It was not a gift to Leo. It was an investment in them, an investment that was no longer sound. I added a third item to the list. 3. New will. The air conditioner cycled off. The silence deepened. I sat there in the beige armchair, the weak coffee cold in its cup, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was waiting for anything. The future was no longer something that would happen to me. It was something I was going to build. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The sky outside the window was a bruised purple. I showered, the water pressure surprisingly strong. I dressed in the same clothes I'd worn yesterday. They felt different. They felt like my own. I did not go to the airport. I went downstairs to the hotel restaurant. It was empty except for a lone businessman staring into a laptop. I ordered pancakes, bacon, and more black coffee. The coffee was better here, stronger. The waitress was a woman my age, her face a roadmap of a long life. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of decades on her feet. "You on your way somewhere or on your way back?" she asked, setting the plate down. "Both," I said. She gave me a small, knowing smile and refilled my cup. After breakfast, I sat in the lobby and made the first call. It was 9 o'clock in his time zone. Mr. Davies answered on the second ring. "Frank," he said, his voice crisp. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I thought you were in California." "Plans changed," I said. "I need to make some adjustments." Davies, I never called him by his first name. It kept things clean. "Adjustments. First, the power of attorney. The one naming my son, David. I want it revoked. Immediately." There was a brief pause. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. "Okay, that's straightforward. Is there a reason? Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly clear," I said. "That's the reason." "I see," he said, though I knew he didn't. "Not yet. Anything else?" "The seed money I'd arranged to gift to my grandson, Leo, for his startup. I am revoking that gift. I want you to draft a letter to my son and his wife, informing them that the funds will not be forthcoming. Cite a change in financial strategy, nothing more. Another pause, this one longer. Frank, that's a significant gift. Are you sure? Once we send that letter, it's a bell you can't unring. I'm not interested in unringing it, I said. I'm interested in the silence after the ringing stops. Very well, Mr. Davies said. His voice was all business now. I'll have the revocation of the PO filed by noon and a draft of the letter for you to review by end of day. No need to review, I said. Just send it. I hung up. The first brick was laid. It was solid. My next stop was a branch of my bank. It was a large, impersonal building of glass and steel. It felt appropriate. I took a number and sat in a plush chair, the air thick with the smell of wealth and disinfectant. When my number was called, I sat down opposite a young woman named Brenda. Her name tag had a small, cheerful, smiley face next to it. How can I help you today, Mr. Miller? She asked. I need to update the beneficiaries on my accounts, I said, sliding my identification across the desk. She typed for a few moments. Okay, I see you have your son, David, and his wife, Karen, listed as payable on death beneficiaries for your checking, savings, and investment accounts. That's what I want to change, I said. I want them removed. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked up from her screen. Removed, sir? Do you have a new beneficiary you'd like to designate? Not at this time, I said. For now, I want the beneficiary to be my estate. Of course, she said, her professionalism clicking back into place. She turned the monitor toward me. So, I'll be removing David Miller and Karen Miller. Is that correct? I looked at their names on the screen. Just letters. Black pixels on a white background. They had no weight. No power. That is correct, I said. I signed a form she printed. My signature was firm. As I walked out of the bank, the sun was high in the sky. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, as if I had just set down a heavy bag I didn't realize I'd been carrying. I booked a flight home for that afternoon. Walking back into my own house was jarring. The silence here was different from the hotel. It was a heavy silence, filled with the ghosts of laughter, of arguments, of Martha's humming. The air smelled of old leather and wood polish, the scent of my life. The first thing I saw was the family photo on the mantelpiece. A professional portrait from a few years ago. David, Karen, Leo, me, and Martha. We were all smiling, but I saw it now. My smile was tired. Martha's was strained. David and Karen were looking at the camera. Leo was looking at his grandmother. I picked up the heavy silver frame. I looked at Martha's face. Oh, Marty, I whispered. You saw it, didn't you? You saw it all along. I didn't put it back. I carried it into my study, opened the bottom drawer of my big oak desk, and placed it inside, face down. I closed the drawer. The click of the wood settling was quiet, but it echoed in the empty house. Then I went to my workshop, my sanctuary. The smell of sawdust and machine oil was a balm. This was a place of creation, of repair, a place where things made sense. You measure twice, you cut once. The rules were clear. On the workbench, under a clean shop cloth, was a small, dovetailed cherry wood box. I had been making it for Leo. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a set of antique rosewood chisels that had belonged to my father. They were perfectly balanced, the steel holding an edge like nothing else. I had been saving them for him, for the day he started building things with his hands, not just with code. I picked one up. The handle was smooth, worn into a perfect shape by my father's grip, and then by mine. It was a legacy, a history. I carefully placed the chisel back in its slot. I folded the foam over it, closed the lid of the box, and placed it on a high shelf at the very back. It was not a gift to be given to a boy whose parents would sell it for networking opportunities. It was a history to be preserved. I spent the rest of the afternoon changing the locks on the doors. The old brass ones were tarnished, the mechanisms worn. I replaced them with heavy, formidable deadbolts. The process was methodical. The whir of the drill, the rasp of the screwdriver, the final, satisfying snick of the bolts sliding home. Each turn of the screw was a word in a conversation I would never have. Each new lock a boundary I had never had the courage to set. When I was finished, I made a pot of real coffee the way I liked it. Strong, black, and hot. I sat in my old leather armchair, the one with the worn spots that knew the shape of my body, and I waited. I didn't know what for, but I knew it was coming. The first text arrived 2 days later. It was from Leo. "Grandpa, are you okay? Mom said you had to cancel your trip last minute. I was really hoping to see you. Graduation wasn't the same." I read the message 3 times. A pang of something sharp like grief went through me. The boy was innocent in this. A pawn. But replying to him would be a move on a chessboard, not mine. It would pull me back into the game. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keypad. I wanted to write, "I was there, son. I was there, and they threw you a party but forgot to invite me." But I didn't. I pressed the delete button. The message vanished. The silence that followed felt deliberate. It was my choice. The next day, a call from David. I let go to voicemail. The message, when I listened to it later, was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "Dad, it's me. Just calling to see. Well, to see if you're okay. Karen said you never showed, and we didn't hear from you. We were a little worried." And Leo was disappointed. "Give me a call when you get this." The tone was all wrong. It wasn't worry. It was annoyance. The inconvenience of a loose end. The administrative burden of a father who had gone off script. I deleted the message. I did not call back. I went out to the garage and started to clean. I wiped down my tools, oiled the moving parts, organized screws and nails into their little plastic bins. The work was meditative. It was real. Each tool had a function. Each screw had a purpose. There was no subtext. The phone rang again. Karen this time. I recognized the number. I set the phone down on the workbench and let it ring until it stopped. Her voicemail, when it appeared, was different. The velvet glove was off. "Frank, this is Karen. I have to say, this is all very childish. Disappearing like that. You had us worried sick, and you completely ruined Leo's graduation weekend with your drama. Whatever's going on, you could at least have the decency to let us know you're alive. Call David. Worried sick." The words were hollow. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the appearance of the thing. The messy, inconvenient story of a missing father. They were worried it made them look bad. And the drama. My God, my silence was drama. My absence was a scene. It was an astonishing piece of projection. They had created the situation, and now they were blaming me for my reaction to it. My quiet, simple, invisible reaction. I deleted her message, too. The act of it was becoming a small, satisfying ritual, a digital sweeping of the floor. The next text came from David later that night. "Okay, Dad, I got a very strange letter from your lawyer today. This has to be some kind of mistake. About Leo's seed money? Call me. Immediately." The mask was completely gone now. The feigned concern had evaporated, replaced by pure, uncut panic. Not panic for my well-being. Panic for the money. I read the text, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No benefulgle. Just the quiet confirmation that I had been right. I had been a bank, a resource, and now the vault was closed. I turned the phone off. Completely off. The little screen went dark. The sudden absence of its potential light was a relief. I went into the kitchen, put a jazz record on the old turntable, and brewed a cup of decaf. The music, soft and melancholic, filled the quiet rooms. It was the music Martha and I used to listen to in the evenings. I sat in my armchair, the one facing the window, and watched the neighborhood lights come on, one by one. I was not lonely. I was alone, and there was a universe of difference between the two. Loneliness is a lack. Aloneness is a presence. The presence of oneself. For the first time, I was fully present in my own life. The silence wasn't an absence of their voices. It was the presence of mine. A week passed, a quiet, orderly week. I established a new rhythm. I woke with the sun. I drank my coffee while reading the newspaper, the whole paper, not just the headlines. I worked in my shop, not on any big project, but on small things. I repaired a wobbly chair. I sharpened all the kitchen knives. I built a birdhouse from scrap cedar. The tasks were small, but they were mine. The results were tangible. The chair was now steady. The knives were sharp. The birdhouse was solid and smelled of the forest. I did not turn on my phone. It sat on the kitchen counter like a small, black stone. Inert. One afternoon, the landline rang. I almost never used the landline. It was a relic, a holdover from Martha's insistence that we have a real phone. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick it up. Hello, Grandpa. It was Leo. His voice was hesitant, small. Leo, I said. It was all I could manage. I got your number from Aunt Carol, he said, rushing the words out. I'm sorry to bother you. Mom and Dad took my phone. Of course they did. Control the flow of information. You're not bothering me, son, I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him take a shaky breath. Grandpa, I'm so sorry, he said, and his voice cracked. I heard them talking. After they got the letter from your lawyer, I heard what they did. About your ticket. About everything. Here it was. The truth, spoken aloud by someone else. It was a strange, validating pain. It was my graduation, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't place. Anger? Shame? It was my graduation, and I was so excited you were coming. I kept looking for you. They told me you got sick. I wasn't sick, Leo, I said, my voice quiet. I know, he whispered. I know now. I had a huge fight with them. They don't get it. They just don't get it. Mom keeps calling you childish. Dad keeps talking about the money, about how you've sabotaged my future. I could picture the scene. The manufactured hysteria. The casting of me as the villain in their story. My future, Leo said, and his voice was stronger now, laced with a bitterness that sounded too old for him. They don't care about my future. They care about their investment. They were talking about the second house they could buy, the vacations they could take. I closed my eyes. Of course. Grandpa, I want you to know, Leo said, his voice firm, resolute. I told him I'm not doing it. The startup. I'm not taking money from that other guy, Arthur. I'm not building my future on that. On what they did to you. The line was silent, but it was a heavy, meaningful silence. In that moment, a bridge formed across 1,000 miles, across a generation. He saw me. He saw the truth of it. He had chosen integrity over opportunity. He had his grandmother's eyes, and he had her heart, too. That's a hard choice, son, I said, my throat tight. It wasn't hard, he said. It was the only choice. I am sorry, Grandpa. I'm just so sorry they treated you like that. The apology was not for the lost money. It was not an attempt to fix things. It was a simple, profound acknowledgement of the wound. It was the first honest thing I had heard from that house in years. It's all right, Leo, I said. We're all right. And I knew, as I said it, that it was true. I knew we is smaller, more honest we. We talked for a long time. Not about his parents, not about the money. We talked about his classes, about a girl he liked, about a book he was reading. It was a normal conversation, a conversation between a grandson and his grandfather. It was a gift more precious than any amount of seed money. When we hung up, the heavy silence of the house was gone. It was just quiet, peaceful. The next morning, I turned my cell phone back on. There were dozens of messages. I deleted them all without reading them. Then I made another call to Mr. Davies. Davies, I said, I need to make another adjustment. The next steps were methodical. Cold. I felt like a surgeon, excising a sickness from my own body. It was a painful process, but necessary. For survival. I met with Mr. Davies. His office was sterile, smelling of paper and old law books. It was a place devoid of sentiment. Perfect. A new will, Frank? He asked, peering at me over his glasses. We just updated yours 3 years ago. The circumstances have changed, I said. I slid a piece of paper across his desk. It was a page from my notebook. He read it. His eyebrows rose. You want to disinherit David and Karen completely. Completely, I confirmed. I want to establish a testamentary trust. Everything, the house, the stocks, the accounts, goes into the trust. And the beneficiary? My grandson, Leo Miller, I said. And only Leo Miller. Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair. He steepled his fingers. This is a dramatic step, Frank. It will be contested. They will claim undue influence or diminished capacity. I'm of sound mind and body, I said, my voice as steady as the oak desk between us. My capacity for understanding my own affairs has, in fact, never been clearer. And the only person influencing me is me. He studied me for a long moment. He saw the set of my jaw. He saw the clarity in my eyes. He saw a client who knew exactly what he wanted. And what about the house? He asked. I'm selling it, I said. That was the biggest step. The house was a museum of my life with Martha. Every scuff on the floorboard was a memory. Every nail on the wall had a story. But it was also the house David and Karen saw as their inheritance. A property, an asset. They had already mentally decorated it, mentally appraised it. Selling it wasn't just a financial decision. It was a liberation. It was taking the board off the table. I added a stipulation to the trust, a clause Mr. Davies called unorthodox but legally sound. The money in the trust was for Leo, for his education, for a down payment on a house of his own, for his travel, for his life. But it could not be accessed for any business venture that included, in any capacity, his parents. It was his future, free and clear. His escape hatch. The wheels of the law grind slow, but they grind fine. In the weeks that followed, I signed papers. I met with a realtor, a brisk woman who saw only square footage and comps, not the ghosts in the corners. I started packing. Packing a life is a strange process. You hold up an object, a chipped coffee mug, a faded photograph, a paperback with a broken spine, and you have to decide if the memory it holds is worth the space it will take up in your future. I was ruthless. I filled boxes for charity. I filled bags with trash. I kept only what was essential. My tools, Martha's recipe box, my father's watch, a handful of books, the cherrywood box with the rosewood chisels. I found a small, two-bedroom apartment in a newer building across town. It had a balcony that overlooked a park. It was clean, bright, and anonymous. It held no memories. It was a blank page. The for sale sign on my lawn was the final public declaration. It was a beacon, and it didn't take long for the moths to fly toward it. They came on a Saturday afternoon. I was taping up a box of old records when the doorbell rang. Not the new, musical chime I had installed, but a furious, insistent pounding on the door itself. I knew who it was. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. David and Karen. Their faces were distorted, flushed with anger. I opened the door. Not all the way, just enough to block the entrance with my body. What on earth are you doing? Karen hissed, her voice a low, furious thing. She pointed a trembling finger at the sign on the lawn. A for sale sign? Are you out of your mind? David pushed past her. He tried for the concerned son routine, but the anger was leaking out around the edges. Dad, what is this? You can't sell the house. This is our house. This is Leo's house. It is my house, I said. My voice was calm. It was remarkable how calm I felt. My heart was beating a steady, even rhythm. And I'm selling it. You're doing this to punish us, Karen accused. Because of the money. This is a tantrum, Frank. A selfish, senile tantrum. Senile. The word they would use to the lawyers. The word they would use to explain this to their friends. The word that would invalidate me, my decisions, my very existence. This has nothing to do with punishment, I said, looking directly at David. His face was a mixture of confusion and rage. He genuinely didn't understand. He saw the world only through the lens of his own needs. Then what is it, he demanded. First you disappear, then you pull the money for Leo's future. Now you're selling our family home from under us. What did we do to deserve this? And there it was. The question. The final, clarifying question. And it deserved an answer. A simple one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture. I just stood there in the doorway of the house I would soon leave, and I told them the truth. I flew 1,000 miles for Leo's graduation. I began, my voice quiet, but it cut through their anger like a shard of glass. I took a taxi to your house. I walked up the driveway. I was standing in the yard by the azaleas. Their faces changed. The anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of something else. Fear. Recognition. I heard you, Karen, I said, turning my eyes to her. Her face went pale. I heard you talking to your friend. About my ticket. About how it was a stroke of genius to give it away. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And I heard you, David, I said, turning back to my son. I heard you say I could watch it on a live stream. That it would be less confusing for me. I let the words hang in the air between us. The unassailable truth. But the words weren't the important part. I continued, my voice dropping even lower. It was the laughter. I heard you laugh. Both of you. You laughed at the convenience of my being gone. The silence that followed was absolute. There was no defense. There was no justification. I had been a witness to my own erasure. Karen found her voice first, a weak, sputtering thing. Frank, it wasn't like that. We were just. It was practical. We were going to call you. No, I said. It was the calmest, most powerful word I had ever spoken. You were not. You had already decided my presence was worth less than a business contact. You made a calculation. And now I have made mine. David just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The little boy who had soared on his bicycle was gone. In his place was a stranger in a middle-aged body, realizing for the first time that actions have consequences. That fathers are not just fixtures. They are men, and men can walk away. This conversation is over, I said. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't give them a chance to spin another story, to craft another justification. I closed the door. I did not slam it. I closed it gently, firmly. The new deadbolt slid into its housing with a solid, satisfying thunk. It was the sound of a period at the end of a very long sentence. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the cool metal of the doorknob, and I listened. I heard their shocked silence, then a few muffled, angry words. Then the sound of their car doors slamming and the engine starting. The crunch of tires on the gravel as they drove away. And then there was peace. The move was easier than I expected. The movers were efficient, a team of young men who called me sir and handled my remaining possessions with a detached care. I stood in the empty house one last time. The rooms echoed. The floors were clean, scrubbed of the past. There were pale rectangles on the walls where pictures used to hang. It was a shell. It no longer belonged to me. I felt no sadness, only a sense of completion. My new apartment was clean and smelled of fresh paint. The afternoon sun streamed through the sliding glass door to the balcony. I directed the movers where to put the few pieces of furniture I had kept. My armchair, my workbench, my bed. When they were gone, I stood in the middle of my new living room. The silence was different here. It was a blank canvas. It was the silence of possibility. I spent the first few days setting up my new life. I unpacked the books. I arranged my tools in the spare room, which was now my workshop. I bought a new coffee pot. I found a local VFW post, a small, unassuming brick building where old men played cards and drank cheap beer. They knew my story without me having to tell it. They saw the Vietnam veteran cap I wore sometimes, and that was enough. They understood service, and they understood being forgotten. I established a routine. It was a simple, quiet routine, but it was mine. I would wake up, make coffee, and sit on my balcony, watching the people in the park below. Dog walkers, joggers, parents with strollers. The ordinary, beautiful pageant of life. I would spend a few hours in my workshop. I wasn't building anything grand. I was repairing things. I went to a local thrift store and bought an old, wobbly end table. I took it apart, re-glued the joints, sanded it down, and gave it a new coat of tung oil. The wood grain came alive under my hands. I had taken something broken and made it whole again. I talked to Leo every Sunday. He was working a summer job at a bookstore. He was saving money. He was thinking of studying architecture. Like you, Grandpa, he said, building things that last. We never spoke of his parents. There was no need. Our relationship now existed in a space they could not touch. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the last of the boxes from a move. At the bottom of one was the brown paper parcel I had taken on the plane, the drafting pencils, and the journal for Leo. I had forgotten all about it. I rewrapped it, put it in a new box, and mailed it to him. I included a short note. For your ideas. The good ones. He called me the night he got it. His voice was full of a quiet awe. They're beautiful, Grandpa. Thank you. He understood the unspoken message. The good ideas. The ones that were his alone. A month after I moved in, a thick envelope arrived. There was no return address, but I recognized David's handwriting. It was the weak, sloping penmanship of a disappointing son. I almost threw it away. I had no obligation to read it. My business with him was concluded. But curiosity is a stubborn old mule. I slit it open with a kitchen knife. It was a letter, 6 pages front and back. A long, rambling confession. It was full of justifications of, I was under a lot of stress, and Karen was just trying to help Leo. It was full of excuses dressed up as reasons. But buried in the self-pity, there were a few genuine sentences. I remember standing in the yard, hearing what I was saying, and a part of me knew it was wrong. But I said it anyway. I don't know why. It was just easier. And at the very end, you were right. We laughed. I'm sorry. I read the letter twice. The apology was there. A small, tarnished thing, but it was there. But an apology is not absolution. It is not a key. It is simply an acknowledgement of the lock. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer of my new end table, the one I had fixed, the one that was now steady and strong. I did not reply. The door to that relationship was not bolted, perhaps, but it was closed. It would be up to me if it ever opened again. And it would only open if they learned to knock, not to pound. It would only open if they learned to wait. Tonight, the air is cool. I am sitting in my armchair, the one from the old house. It fits perfectly in this new space. A baseball game is on the radio. The announcer's voice a familiar, comforting murmur. The lights from the park are twinkling below. In my workshop, the cherrywood box with my father's chisels sits on the workbench, waiting. One day, I will give them to Leo, not as an inheritance, but as a gift, from one builder to another. I am not happy, not in the way that commercials sell happiness. It is not a bright, loud, shiny thing. I am something better. I am steady. I am whole. I am at peace. The announcer's voice rises with the crack of a bat. A runner is heading for home. I close my eyes and just listen. The sound of the crowd, the flow of the game, the quiet hum of my new life. It is enough.